Welcome back to Maine's Veterans Voices, a project of the Library of Congress and recording the oral histories of Maine's veterans. I'm Angus King, and this morning I'm talking to one of our great heroes in Maine, Harry Hafford, up in Aroostook County. In many ways, I think the father of the Veterans Cemetery in Caribou, and a guy who has just made enormous contributions to the life of his community and his state, but also especially the veterans up in his region. Harry, good morning, and let's start with Masardis and the beginnings of your life before you joined the Air Force.
Well, I was born and brought up in Masardis. Uh, I have 7 siblings, come from a poor family. Not to complain, but back then we didn't have any running water, no indoor facilities, but we got by.
And now you joined the Air Force pretty early, right? You were still a teenager.
I joined the Air Force when I was 17.
And what motivated you at that time?
Well, at that time, I guess what motivated me the most was just I had left home and needed a place to get started in life.
And what made you pick the Air Force?
Well, I guess I didn't have any particular reason. It was either the Air Force or the Army, and I settled on the Air Force.
And where did they go? Were you flying jet airplanes over the Atlantic?
No, no. I joined and I was in South Carolina, and I went through basic in Lackland Air Force Base in Texas. Went to tech school in Amarillo, Texas, and from there they sent me to Alaska.
To Alaska. Where were you in Alaska?
I was at Ladd Air Force Base. It's since changed over as Fort Wayne right now, but back then it was Ladd.
And that's up around Fairbanks, isn't it?
That's exactly. It's in Fairbanks.
Yeah, I've been up there. That's a fur piece, as they say. That's a long way from anywhere.
It is.
And so, what was your job? What was your assignment?
Uh, I went to school to become a petroleum, oil, and lubricant guy. So basically, what I did is I drove a refueling truck on the flight line.
Okay. And that was your training was to be to refuel the planes when they were getting them up and ready to go.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
how long were you in Alaska?
I was in Alaska 2 years, and when I left Alaska, I went to Massachusetts, which is now it was Otis Air Force Base then, and it's now Camp Edwards down on the Cape.
Well, one of the problems, I wonder if you agree with me on this, but I think one of the problems we have right now is that there are no real bases left in New England, in the Northeast. And I live here in Brunswick, where we've lost our Naval Air Station that we had for so long. And young people growing up don't have any exposure to people in uniform.
This is true. This is true. I personally didn't like the fact when they eliminated the draft. I think that our young people should get a taste of serving their country.
Yeah, and now what's happening, I can tell you from sitting in on Armed Services committee meetings in Washington, the bulk of the people going into the military today are from the South and the Southwest, because that's where all the bases are. And I don't think it's healthy to have the Army, for example, to be a regional basically a regional force rather than one that represents the whole country. It's something that worries me, and I'm encouraging them to do more recruiting in the Northeast.
I agree with you. I agree.
Now, you were at Otis Air Force Base in Massachusetts, and then what?
When I got out of the Air Force, uh, I wanted to stay in the service. So what I did is I enlisted in the Army. There wasn't any rank in the Air Force at the time. We had a lot of uh, service people, not veterans, service people. They had gotten field promotions to officers, and they were all being downgraded back to their permanent rank, and that sort of closed off any openings for any promotions. So I thought I would try the Army, and I enlisted in the Army. Went back to school for administration, and I had planned on going to Fort Hamilton in Brooklyn, New York, being a young guy. And I thought that it would be kind of nice to get a little taste of the city. Well, when I got out of school, and I went on TDY, and sitting in TDY there in Fort Dix, New Jersey, and I got new orders that sent me back to Alaska.
Oh, you're kidding.
No.
With the Army.
To the same place, but when I got back here, it was Fort Wainwright, not Ladd.
Amazing. And now, when you went from Air Force to Army, did anything carry over, any rank or seniority or pay or anything, or was it just like starting out totally fresh?
Well, I didn't start out totally fresh, but pretty close. The only thing, my service time carried over, and of course, I didn't start off as a private E1. Again, I started off as a private again, E2. When I got out of school, they made me an E3. You know, but
So did you spend your whole Army time in Alaska, or did you have any other assignments?
no, I finished out my Army in Alaska, and when I came back from Alaska, I was discharged. So I
Did you
spent a total of,
did you come back to Maine right then?
I did. I came back to Maine and stayed there, but just for a little bit, and then I went to Connecticut and went to work for General Motors in Bristol, Connecticut, New Departure Hyatt. And I worked for General Motors for 30 plus years, and that's where I retired.
Well, there are plenty of people from Maine who went to Connecticut in those days, to Pratt Whitney and General Motors. I'm sure you knew people from Aroostook County.
Oh yes, there was a lot of people down there. When I went to apply for a job, when I got out of the service, I applied for a job there at General Motors. People from Maine had a good work recognition, you know. They had a work record, and when I went in and told them I was from Maine, they said, "You're hired."
Well, that's sort of the way I've been with Aroostook County. What I tell people is, if somebody's from Aroostook County, you can hire them sight unseen. Kay Rand, Sharon Campbell, Sue Bell, you name it.
Yep. Yeah.
So 32.
I stayed at General Motors, like I say, over 30 years and retired.
Now, was that a manufacturing facility there?
It was a bearing plant. We made bearings and clutches. I'm going to say that we averaged about 4,000 people,
Wow.
counting white collar and blue collar. And they ended up closing that plant.
Well, unfortunately, a lot of plants like that were closed. A lot of them are coming back now. Pratt Whitney still has a big plant down in Berwick, Maine, with 3 or 4 thousand people. They make jet engine parts. They're headquartered in Connecticut, but that's a big part of the Southern Maine economy.
Yeah.
Now, so when you retired, you came home?
When I retired on January the 15th, in 1995, and I was home on January the 16th. I was back to Maine January the 16th.
Good. It sounds like you didn't ever think about staying around in Connecticut.
No. That was my plan when I retired to be back home in Maine.
Now let me go back to when you separated from the service and went to work at General Motors. One of the problems we're seeing now is that the separation time, the transition from active duty to veteran status is sometimes difficult, and that's where we're seeing veteran suicides and a lot of homelessness and those kinds of things. In those days, was that transition any big deal, or was it a problem, or was there any help from veteran services organizations or anything, or did you just walk out of uniform one day and into work the next?
No, there was no help back then. When you were, excuse me, when you were discharged, you were on your own. Today it's a lot better, but back then, no, there was no transition. There was no push to hire veterans or anything like that.
Yeah, that's yeah, that, as you say, it's a lot better, but I'm still not satisfied. It's as good as it could be. I'm on Armed Services and Veterans Affairs now, so I'm talking to both sides of them and trying to get them to work more closely. For example, I think when somebody leaves active duty, the state veterans office ought to be notified so somebody can, meet them at the airport, or, tell them, assign a VSO person to look after them when they're coming home.
I think that's correct. I agree with that.
So you came home in '95, and well, let's talk about your activity in as a veteran. What you really started a sort of third career, I guess, working with and for veterans. Tell me about some of the things that you did up there when you got back to Maine.
Well, when I came back to Maine, I like to tell people when you retire, it's not about doing nothing. It's maybe like doing something you like to do. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
And when I came back up here, I had been coming back to Maine for several years. It wasn't as if I just jumped out of General Motors and jumped up in Maine. I had a second home up here, and I had numerous friends, and most of them were veterans, and 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 a couple of them sort of inspired me to get involved with veterans, and so I did. I got involved with veterans, and that went pretty well. And I got involved with a place in Caribou called the Vet Center. And what I got involved over there with Senator was that we did an outreach program. A lady by the name of Debbie McPherson
Uh-huh.
and I and we applied for surplus veterans clothing. They had a lot of surplus clothing that during Clinton's time, that I don't know who made the decision down there in Washington, but they made the decision that it was never going to be used again for veterans or for service people. So why not give it out?
Wow.
So what we would do is we'd get a list of all this different surplus clothing and apply for what we thought we could use. And so I did that program for 5 years. till we figured we had done enough surplus clothing around here that we had pretty much reached everybody.
Huh.
But in
How-
those 5,
Can you put a number on it? I mean, how many shirts or pairs of pants?
I can put a number on it for in money, and of course I'm using government cost, what the government paid for it. We got a little over $8 million worth of surplus clothing in 5 years.
Wow, that's amazing.
What we did is we set up what we call satellites, and we had different veteran service organizations that would take us. We'd give them a share of the clothing, and they would distribute it like in Madawaska, Fort Kent, Fulton, Ashland. You get the picture.
Sure.
And so we even had a satellite up in Canada, because there was a lot of Canadians that served in the armed forces in the United States.
Now, were you active in one or the other of the VSOs? Were you Legion or VFW or one of them?
I was active with AMVETS and the Legion,
Okay.
but mostly I was not eligible to join the VFW, but I did an awful lot of work with the VFW in Ashland.
And so now, when you came home, did you go to Caribou or did you go back to Masardis? You mentioned you had a place up there.
I went back to Masardis. That's where I live now.
Okay.
Big city.
Yeah, big city, big sawmill.
Yeah.
Well, so you did the clothing project, but then sometime in the next 8 years, because I remember being a part of it, talk about the origins of the cemetery.
Well, I was still doing the surplus clothing with the vet center, and through the vet center, I had gotten word that they was trying to start a veteran cemetery up here, and Peter Meisberger and that crew there, I joined up with them, and with the plan of getting a veteran cemetery up here in the county. And I think probably somewhere along the line we had to get the governor's stamp of approval, which would have been you. You was the governor at the time. But
well, I'll tell you who was the key guy on that one was Earl Adams, and of course Earl was from Easton, and he came to me and said, there's no veteran cemetery north of Augusta, and these guys are talking about one up in Aroostook, and let's do it. And it wasn't. I can't take any credit. All I had to do was say yes to Earl, which is what I usually did anyway.
Yes, I know Earl. He's a good guy.
I'll say
very cooperative. And I think if I recall correctly, Earl had a deputy, General Libby, and then underneath General Libby was Frank Soares.
Yep.
And so once we got started, John Noble stepped up and donated 33.3 acres of land, which was really the big stumbling block that we had to get over. We had to have land, and that's where we went from there.
Well, that's a beautiful piece of land. Was it a farm? Was it a potato farm? What was on that land when John had it?
It was originally a farm, and it is a beautiful piece of land. And to just extend that a little bit down the road, we had projects at the cemetery that we wanted to do, and I know I'm getting ahead of the whole procedure, but I want to get this in there. once we was established and we started doing ceremonies at the cemetery, which we did 4 a year, Memorial Day, Veterans Day, POW MIA Day, and later on we added a flag raising day. But some of our veterans were getting to be like me, you know, rather long in life, and they kept telling me, Harry, we can't come to your ceremonies anymore because we don't have any place to go to the bathroom. So I said, well, let's see what we can do about raising money to build a bathroom. And where we wanted to put the bathroom was at the top side of the cemetery. And the state said, well, you know, we're in the business of burying people. We're not in the business of doing stuff like that. And so we haggled it back and forth, and finally the state agreed that if we would put just a narrow strip with the bathroom would be on the cemetery grounds, right on the line, and across the line we would do the septic system and so on. But once we got started with that, Senator, then we ran into a problem with the city regulations that you couldn't do a divided septic system, half on one land and half on the other land.
Oh man.
So we worked around that, and then within a couple of days, John called me and he said, Harry, would you come over and see me? And of course, when John called, I always went. And so I went over, and he said, let's go see my lawyer. So we went down and seen his lawyer, and what he had done is that he had taken a border around the cemetery that he had originally saved, in case we had any disputes with the neighbors.
Yeah.
And he decided to turn that over to us. He said, I'm going to give you this extra land. So he ended up giving us almost another 14 acres of land, which we now have almost 47 acres out there. And we got our bathroom in.
And you've got a nice visitor center there. I mean, it's a beautiful setup, and the flagpoles. I think it's one of the most beautiful places in Maine.
Well, thank you. I do too. But you know, when we started, our goal was to have a veteran cemetery that not only veterans could be proud of and use, but the surrounding community could be proud of. And I think we've pretty much accomplished that.
How many veterans are there, are buried there, Harry?
Well, if I was going to do anything, I'd be hazarding a guess, right?
Sure.
But I'm going to say someplace that in-ground burials, maybe around 900.
Wow.
But we have the columbarium wall niches, and I think there's probably another 1,000 or so in those niches. But
You know,
I haven't been there for several years, so I couldn't tell you exactly.
well, but we ought to pause there and reflect on what that means. I mean, that's almost 2,000 families that don't have to travel 3 or 4 hours to lay flowers at their father, brother, husband, grandfather's grave. I mean, it really means a lot. It seems to me to have the cemetery in the area. I'm going down. We're taping here today, the week before Memorial Day. We're going to release this tape on Memorial Day, and I'm going to say something about that in a minute. But this Memorial Day, I'm going to the Veteran Cemetery down in Springvale, just north of Sanford, on the New Hampshire border in southern Maine. And I think it's really important that there be more than one, and that they be someplace where the families can be close by. And I think what you said, almost 2,000 families in Aroostook have their veterans close by. I think that's a very important thing you've accomplished.
I do too, and I can tell you, uh, the veterans up here, I don't think I could verbally tell you how appreciative the veterans are up here that we have a veteran cemetery right here, where that they know that if they pass away, that their families can come and visit them without having to drive 4, 5, or 6 hours down to Augusta.
Yeah.
And it's really been well received, I think. The community has supported us just tremendously, and
Well, I remember being up there. It was probably Veterans Day. It was cold as it was cold as the dickens. I I remember those metal chairs were some cold, but it was a very moving ceremony. As you know, I've been up a number of times, but I'll never forget the one that we were all huddled up.
I remember that day. I remember you taking your hat off and giving it to a guy that looked awful cold to you.
Oh, I think it was Dennis. I think it was our friend Dennis from the radio station. I remember I remember that too. Well, Harry, you've given so much of your life to the veterans in the region, and uh, and my experience up there is that they do really appreciate it. And now we've lost John, haven't we? John
We
Noble.
have.
But what a contribution he made. I mean, that was an amazing gift that it really enabled the whole thing.
It did, and you know, Senator, I'd like to just throw in something else. When we was first getting started out there, of course, we had some projects uh, uh, that weren't exactly uh, on the top of the list for a lot of people, so to speak, when they were making donations and contributions to help out. And well, one of them I'll tell you was Canadian geese uh, management area. We had a lot of problem with Canadian geese. They was coming in and defecating all over the place.
I was wondering how you were going to describe that.
But anyway, I got together with some biologists from the state, and they determined how to maybe control these Canadian geese where they wouldn't be such a bother. And trying to raise money for that project was quite slow.
I bet.
Yeah. Uh, uh, and John Noble, as he always does, he stepped in, and on that project there, he must have put in about $7,000-8,000 of in-kind services just to help us get that project done.
Wow.
And so, every project that we did out there, John always told me, Harry, he said, if you need help, come and see me. He said, don't come and see me and ask me to do everything. He said, if you need help, I'll help you. And he kept his word right to the end.
Well, I'll tell you the other guy up there, and you mentioned him earlier that I miss is Peter Meisberger. He was always part of the VF delegation that came to my office in Washington, and he was a stalwart up there.
Yep. Pete was a very good veterans advocate. One of
Yeah,
the best.
he always was. Well, Harry, I just want to thank you again. Thanks for your service, both in the service in Air Force and Army. Although I had a guy, an interviewed a guy about a year ago who was Army, Air Force, and Navy. So you know he got you beat by one, but still, it's not everybody that serves in two branches. And but your real service has been so great up in the county to the veterans up there. It you know, from the clothing project to the cemetery, what a legacy, what a legacy you've left for those people up there. That's fantastic. And I want to close this out with just a word about Memorial Day, because we're going to be releasing this tape on Memorial Day. And how much it means here in Maine, going back to the Civil War. Um, during the Civil War, 59% of the men in Maine between 18 and 45 fought in the Civil War. Almost 2/3. That's really incredible. One of the highest percentages in the country. And of course, even today, we have one of the highest percentage of veterans in the country. So I just want to thank Harry for the time he spent with us, Harry Hafford, and I want to thank all the veterans of Maine for what you've done for our country on this special Memorial Day. And we'll look forward to visiting with more veterans on Maine's Veterans Voices. Thanks for staying with us. This is Angus King. And Harry, thanks again, and I'll see you up in the county.
Yes, sir. Have a good one.
Yes, sir. You too.